this video I'm going to quickly show you how I rigged up the hands and feet for this character using some really basic expressions, sliders, and nested compositions. Currently the hands are controlled from the null object controller that was created in Duik Tools, the same controller that's used to pull the hand around. And what I've done is I've attached a number of sliders. Each slider represents one finger on the hand itself. So as I pull this slider up or down, the fingers bend and move. This is actually a nested composition here, this hand. So let's go in right here. This is just the nested composition here. And I'm going to just go in this. And all I did is I made this composition and I replaced the static hand that I had. So there are the fingers hard at work. Okay, so there are all the fingers moving around. When I start a nested composition that I'm going to be using sliders for, I usually do the slider effects in the composition I'm working on. Then I marry those values to the outside composition. The reason I do this is so that when I'm working inside the composition, I can control the fingers and test the sliders to make sure they're working. If I had to jump outside of the composition every time, it would actually be really irritating. On these sliders, what you can see is I've just created a little chunk of code. Essentially what I did is I went to the wrist controller. Say I had the wrist right here. I created all the same sliders. So in here I just open up the sliders here in this controller, and then I take the thumb value, I alt click on this to enable expressions, and this is in the nested composition. This is the hand composition here, and I drag it over to the slider value. So what that means is this thumb slider here will always equal this thumb slider. So as you can see, it's at -18, that's now at -18, and if I undo it, it goes back to 755. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this off for now so that I can show you how these all work. So here we go. As you can see, I'm rotating the thumb back and forth, and there's a couple of things happening here. There's a rotation happening here. So right here I've actually, this hand has the puppet tool on it. I've created 3 points, and this is so I could create a slight distortion when the thumb opened and closed. There we go, like when the thumb expands and contracts. And essentially what's happening here is this is rotating. This has a rotation, a little code piece to attach to it. It's adding the slider effect times 0.1 to the rotation of this right here. So when the slider goes up, this rotates by 0.1 of whatever this value is. Pretty simple. The other thing that's happening is, let's have a look at the thumb. The thumb has 2 effects attached to it. It has time remap and it has a rotation value. Now the rotation value, much like the joint up here, has the thumb slider attached to it. So when this thumb slider moves up and down, the thumb is rotating by 0.5 of whatever that value is. So if this value here is 23, this rotates at 10.5. If I disable time remapping, you'll see what happens here. The thumb's actually rotating. Okay? So let's re-enable time remapping. And the other thing that's happening here is time remapping. So what I've done is each finger is a nested composition. And in this composition, I have created a little animation that is 1 second long. Extended to bent. It's 1 second long, but I also have a lot of extra frames here, and this is to act as a buffer for the math over here. Let's have a look here. As the thumb rotates, so as this wrist value goes up for the thumb, it has a time remap value here. It's adding the slider to the thumb. So when the slider hits 10, we're on frame 10. It's on frame 10 of the thumb animation. So it's just moving forward through the thumb animation, and then once the thumb is fully bent, the animation stops, and then the thumb just continues to rotate at the base joint. And it's exactly the same thing for all the other fingers. So if you take a look at let's have a look at the index finger. So there's a little piece of animation here on the index finger, and I've just animated them bending, and using the pin tool and some null objects to be the joints. So that finger bends and stops at 1 second. So if I go back into the hand, over here, go to the wrist, and look at this index finger. There you go. You can see it finishes its animation, but then it continues to bend. Just like the thumb, the rotation value of this nested composition is being affected by the slider. So that's essentially how the hands work. If you wanted to have multiple hands, you could create a number of different hands that are all driven by the same slider values, and actually just have those hands' opacity turn on and off. So you could have a top hand, a side hand, a bottom hand, and actually just swap through them. And they could all be using the exact same code, so you really would just link these slider values, like we have here, the slider values of each hand would all go back to the slider controls on the wrist. So I hope that clarifies this a little bit. It's a pretty basic little trick. It's not uses some pretty simple concepts and just expands on them a little bit. And the last thing I wanted to go through with you really quickly is the feet. Now the way the feet work is I have this shoe here, and I have a toe angle slider. So as I pull the toe angle slider, the toe bends. But then if I change the shoe around, I can go to shoe number 6. I have a number of different shoes. I have 5, I have 4, 2, I have 1, and it also flips the leg. So it goes on shoe 6 and 5. There we go. This shoe animation is fully keyframeable, so I can swap through different shoes really easily. And this is also this toe angle thing. So I'm just going to go in really quick and show you how this shoe is done. So let's go here. Shoe right. Alright, so in the shoe composition, what I have is I have a number of different shoes. And each shoe has its own, let's have a look here. Each shoe has its own null objects that are actually controlling the toe and the way the toe bends. Okay, so I have shoe number 5. I'm going to just turn all this on. So let's have a look at all the code going on here. Okay, so for this shoe, I have enabled the puppet tool, and the puppet tool has been enabled to allow for the toe to bend. So let's have a really quick look at what pins there are. There's only 3 pins, nothing major, and each of these pins is attached to a null object. And these null objects here are the toe, the ball of the foot, the heel, and the ankle. There's not really a need, I am not animating the ankle or the heel. I'm essentially just rotating the ball of the foot. So if I turn off this code, as you can see, I can rotate the ball of the foot. The ball of the foot is actually attached to that slider back in this other composition here. It's attached to this slider here. Using the same technique I did with the hands, just by pick whipping this effect in right here, I can create a direct relationship. So that's attached to the slider. The other thing that's going on is I've also had to add a bit of a distortion, a bit of a shift, a bit of a transform with the toe as it bends, just to create a more believable distortion so that the foot doesn't completely deform, because it did this. I needed it to come out a little bit as it bent, just to maintain the shape of the shoe. So I've added just this, again, this really simple thing. Based on the rotation of this, just add a percentage of that value right here to this bit of code. Really, really simple code. And the very, very last thing is I have this little this chunk of code here. I don't think it's not that big. I have the shoe number, and the shoe number is a value being pulled from here. This right here, the shoe slider. Okay, and it's saying if the shoe number equals 5, then make the shoe opaque, the opacity of the shoe 100%. If it doesn't, make it 0. So if we go here and make shoe 6 come up, okay, in this composition, this opacity is now 0. So let's put it back to 5. There you go. Now shoe opacity, and I did this for each shoe. So I gave each one a value. That's essentially it. There's nothing that special about these shoes. And again, you could nest hands like this too. You could have several hands that are being called up like this, and still have all the controls controlling them here. Because they're referencing all the same rotation values, if this is at 46 and I go to shoe 6, that toe is also bent at 46. And if I go to shoe 3, the same thing. Shoe 3 doesn't actually have a toe on it because it's a head-on toe, and I didn't really want to have a toe bend feature in there. It's really hard to animate a front toe bend. Anyway, so as you can see, each foot maintains the rotation value, which makes it a lot easier to switch between different feet without losing the value of each one. Alright, that about wraps up how I currently build characters in After Effects. These methods and techniques do change depending on the production or the character style. However, the core fundamentals seem to remain the same. I hope these videos have given you some insight into how you may approach your own characters, and perhaps you can even evolve and build on these techniques yourself.